as Bob's working that out, I will take the opportunity just to explain a little bit about the study for him. And Bob, you jump in when you're back. With this Sisto study that I mentioned, that large trial for non-muscle invasive bladder cancer in patients for whom BCG stops working, we had this advocate advisory board, and basically it's made up of, I can't remember exactly the number, maybe 10, 12
okay.
Patient advocates. Oh, there you are, Bob.
Can you hear me now?
Much better.
Yes.
Much better, okay. Let me move along. So over 2 years, I had tumors removed several times. I had BCG, which failed. Then we switched to BCG and interferon, which also failed. So then the choice was between having my bladder removed or to continue the treatment, which is exactly the question that's being answered by the Sisto study. So at that time in 2005, when I was making that decision, there really wasn't any data from a patient perspective of how to make that decision. There was no information about, what the impact of that decision would be. Certainly the doctor could tell me one way or the other is the success of either course of treatment, but there really wasn't anything from a patient perspective. Next slide. So I continued the treatment, and I've been cancer-free since 2005, and I've continued with BCG and interferon maintenance treatments, and now I get a yearly cystoscopy. So as Stephanie mentioned, I've been volunteering with BCAN since 2005, and in terms of patient engagement, it's really about research that's carried out with or by members of the public rather than to or about or for them. We think of maybe doctors doing research studies and they want to do something to you. But this is really research being carried out with the public and by different patients. So you've heard Angie mention some of these PCORI-funded projects. I urge you to go to the PCORI website so you can read more about their overall goals. So I'm going to talk a little bit more from my involvement with these efforts. And these aren't really sequential. Some of them are taking place in parallel. And all of these projects are in collaboration with BCAN. Next slide. So as Angie mentioned, in the Patient Empowerment and Engagement Research Project, known as PEER, we developed online training modules so that we could learn more about clinical trial basics and more about bladder cancer. Not everybody knows all aspects of bladder cancer depending on what you might have been diagnosed with. And then we also measured the effectiveness of that training and how the patient advocates felt, how good that was, and how to improvement. So then, as also mentioned, the patient survey network prioritized several research questions. And one of the questions was, is a cystoscopy a major source of discomfort and anxiety for bladder cancer patients? If you've had a cystoscopy, you know what I'm talking about. So a survey was developed for use by the Patient Survey Network, and it asked various questions about the level of your discomfort and anxiety, whether it has changed between your first cystoscopy and your most recent cystoscopy, and if there was any type of measures that you used or the doctor suggested that might alleviate that discomfort and pain, such as a warm blanket, being able to visualize or see the inside of your bladder while the cystoscopy is going on, whether music helped. So we had about 460 responses. The results were analyzed, and we're going to be, there's possibility of PCORI funding for a pragmatic trial, clinical trial, that's going to look at those issues so that we can measure those things that alleviate the discomfort and anxiety and measure them in a clinical setting and provide some results. So next slide. So we heard about promoting implementation of patient engagement, or PIPE. So a majority of this took place at the recent BCAN Leadership Summit. So one of the activities for PIPE at the summit was how to connect trained research advocates like myself to research teams. So we had brainstorming sessions to gather ideas about these 3 different questions: how to promote patient engagement in research. And we've heard through Patty how some ways that patients can be involved in clinical trials. And involve those research advocates in research and clinical trial teams, and how to get those results out. You know, whether it's through a website or social media or publications in journals, but how to make sure that all that information gets out to the people who need to have that information. Next slide. So Angie talked a little bit about Sisto. I won't go over the details of it. She did a pretty good job of that since she's running that study. But some of the important aspects of it is that this is a pragmatic clinical trial, and it's comparing the effectiveness of the treatment and the outcome in a real-world patient experience. So it's not about you know, which drug is better or which treatment is better. The treatment is still selected by the patient, but we're going to be surveying the patients and some of the caregivers about how things are going over the next several years, what's their quality of life, and various other questions. Next slide. So again, this is comparing the impact of the treatment options. So as part of the trial, they're looking to enroll 900 patients and 25 caregivers. There are 28 sites across the country where they're going to be enrolling those patients. And that process is just beginning in terms of sort of certifying the sites where patients will be enrolled. And there are very strict criteria of who qualifies as a patient. You know, we need an even bigger pool of the 900 patients to see who really qualifies. And the patients will be, there's a split between the patients who are continuing their medical treatment or intravesical therapy versus the patients who have elected to have their bladder removed. And you can go to the study website, sistostudy.org. So Angie showed a little diagram of the makeup of all the different components of the study. And I'm on the Advocate Advisory Board, which is part of the Stakeholder Coordinating Center. Next slide. So, what are the roles of the Advocate Advisory Board? And these statements here were taken directly from, we sort of had an onboarding welcome packet and sort of to roll out to the advocates what we would be doing. So not all of these things are taking place at the same time. And these will be taking place at different times over the course of the study. So the main things, of course, you know, as patients, we want to provide our perspective on the healthcare experience. You know, what has our experience been in terms of intravesical therapy, of having more treatment with medicine versus having our bladders removed. So on the Advocate Advisory Board, we have patients, you know, both different types of patients. So some of the things that we've been doing is reviewing the study protocol and the patient workflow processes, and I'll get more into the specifics of some of those things, refining the educational materials. So you can read the other bullets. Let's go on to the next slide in the interest of time. So most important is what are the qualities of someone who's on the Advocate Advisory Board? And I'd like to focus on the second one. So all of us advocates who are patients, you know, our bladder cancer stories really define us. We've been through a lot. Some people, you know, they might have been, you know, had bladder cancer and had tumors removed once and some BCG and that's it. Other people who have had their bladders removed, it's a much longer process. and people have different various stages and grades of bladder cancer. So, their experiences are sort of either routine or there might be outliers, but we really have to look at it beyond our own personal experiences and what is our experience to help for the greater good. Next slide. So some of the activities that we've done so far, so our first meeting was in March of last year. So initially, we had twice monthly online meetings. Now they're monthly. And we've had a variety of issues to discuss. I've known some of these other people on the advisory board from other activities. So, we're a very compatible group of people. We have very lively discussions. Everybody's opinion is welcomed. Everything is recorded and then, for further review by the stakeholder committees. So we also have yearly in-person meetings at the Bladder Cancer Think Tank. And sometimes those meetings are held with, the online meetings are held with the external advisory board. So we get some cross-pollination of ideas between the people who are external to the study and the advocates. So some of the practical things that we've done is we help develop the materials to recruit patients. So one of the main things is there's a recruitment video. So at the sites that are trying to enroll patients, there's a video that the patients can watch, which lay out the basics. It's presented by patients and a doctor, so they get a patient perspective on what it might be like to enroll in this study. Other things is we've looked at a study slogan. We're looking at sort of an information card that the patient can have to remind them of the details of the study and helping making their decision about enrolling in the project. One interesting thing was we did a review of the baseline patient survey that the patients will be filling out when they're initially enrolled and over time. There was an interesting thing called a time trade-off survey, which is not something that I had ever seen before, and it was kind of sort of disturbing questions, but it is used to evaluate patients' response of whether they thought they made a good decision. So we're also reviewing the engagement goals, and all throughout this process, the people on the Advocate Advisory Board have been surveyed to get feedback on how we think things are going. Do there need to be more interactions? Do we need to get more information from the other committees? Next slide. So some of the activities, to continue the activities we're going to be improving the interpretation of the study findings based on feedback. So these are really things that are going to be happening in the future once we have those study findings, to translate and communicate that information to patients, their families, and their caregivers. And there's also a publications and presentations committees. So through this study, many publications will be developed. And there is a representative from the Advocate Advisory Board who is on that publications and presentations committee. From a personal standpoint, I have found this to be very fulfilling from a variety of standpoints. One, because this is answering a question that I had back in 2005 when I didn't really have any information for me to base my decision on. I've also, I've been connected with Angie Smith for several years on a variety of these PCORI-funded research activities, and I'm looking forward to more of that participation. And it's also just to hear from the researcher's perspective and sort of coming to a common ground between the advocates and the researchers, where, the researchers might have some ideas of what is appropriate for a patient, and really find out that maybe that's not true when they hear what the advocates have to say and the patients have to say. And likewise, as a patient advocate, I'm learning a lot more about research. It's certainly not the kind of clinical trials where we're testing out new drugs and things like that, but has really broadened my perspective on the whole area of research advocacy and patient-centered outcomes. That's the end of my presentation.
Well, thank you all so much. So now we're going to go ahead and, in the interest of time, I'd like to try to get to a few of the questions that have come in. And one of the questions, if someone could just explain what accrual means in a study.
Sure, I'll take that. So accrual is just a word that basically means that, you know, each study has usually a target number of patients that they want to enroll. Let's say, well, for the Sisto study, as an example, is 900. And so accrual is just the word that means that we are, how many patients are basically enrolling in the study. So that's what accrual is.
Great, thanks so much. So when advocates are required to attend meetings in person, how are the associated financial expenses paid in general?
So I can answer that. For the Alliance for Clinical Trials in Oncology, all of the patient advocates have funding to attend the 2 meetings a year. And we don't, yeah, we think it's you know, not right not to fund them to come, and they go to every in-person meeting. Yeah.
As a patient, I have not paid to attend any of the in-person meetings. So through BCAN and the funding from BCORI, they have covered all of my travel costs.
A specific question related to the Sisto trial. Is it too late for a patient to get involved in the Sisto study or to be on the advisory board? Angie?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, right now we have sort of the advisory board sort of set. Of course, we have a certain number because we want to be able to, well, going to the last question, be able to fund them to attend the meetings, to participate. So at this point, we do have that set up. However, there are a lot of other studies that we are still looking for individuals who are interested. So after this, please feel free to either contact Stephanie, Beacon, let me know if you're interested in participating in something similar, because I have other things in the non-muscle invasive bladder cancer space and other spaces as well for bladder cancer that very well might be something be of interest to you, and I'd be happy to set you up with that.
Right, and from the patient perspective, I think, you know, definitely contact Beacon and, you know, just get dialed into the whole process so that you're recognized as someone who wants to participate in these efforts.
So obviously that leads me very well to the last question that we have, which is an excellent question. How do you get involved? And I think I can answer that one. You will be getting an evaluation for tonight's program in just a little bit. And if you want to be involved, please let us know, and we will definitely reach out. You can participate in the online learning system to help make you more familiar with all of bladder cancer, as well as be engaged in some of the next meetings that we have that are specifically focused on bladder cancer research. Angie, do you have, or Patty, do you have any other suggestions?
Go ahead, Patty.
I mute myself, yeah. So I always tell people to start local, you know, in your own community if there are opportunities. When I got involved, I started local, but I am in an area where there's lots of institutions like UNC and Duke. So there were opportunities, but definitely, you know, go to things locally, talk to people locally and network locally, and they'll be also involved in more national organizations as well.
And also, from
the
patient perspective, if you can attend the Bladder Cancer Leadership Summit, that's usually in the fall every year in different locations. It's been local to the Washington, D.C. area. Once it was out in Houston. And that's an excellent opportunity to meet some of the patient research advocates and to meet people like Angie Smith.
And
Well,
everybody will get an invite to the October meeting, which will be in BWI Airport area.
Wonderful. And I'll just, I guess I'll just say, stay tuned, because if you can't start local for whatever reason, you don't know where to begin, Beacon is the perfect place because we can connect you with either local individuals who are interested, or we can provide you with all the different options. And I say stay tuned because we're hoping to revamp the website so that there's a way to do that more seamlessly online. But in the interim, simply contacting Beacon will be perfectly will be the perfect way to sort of get the ball rolling.